Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about preparing for the SEC cybersecurity disclosures. And joining me is someone who's been on the show many times, Barbara Berlin, who's the Managing Director of PwC's Governance Insight Center. Welcome back, Barbara.
Hi, TK. It's always great to be here.
So the topic for today is this SEC cybersecurity disclosures, which the proposal was announced, I believe, in March of this year. And there's been some back and forth, I'm sure, in the comment period. But could you give us an update on the current status, particularly after the climate disclosures have just been launched? So what is the status of the cybersecurity disclosures?
Well, TK, let me share what I know. So the SEC proposed the cyber disclosure rules on March 9th of 2022. There was a 60-day comment period that ended on May 9th. And during that time, the SEC received about 130 comment letters from individuals and organizations. I would say most, but certainly not all, were certainly supportive of the proposal, though they did ask for clarification or changes in some key areas. So we'll have to wait to see how the SEC addresses them. And I expect the SEC now is reading through those comment letters, addressing them as they look to finalize the rules. The SEC certainly has been active. As you mentioned, there's been a lot of rulemaking activity going on there. If we look at the SEC's regulatory agenda, they have listed that the SEC's cyber disclosure rules are set to be finalized in April 2023. So that's the timing that we know of now, is April 2023 for these rules to be released and finalized. And, I will say, of course, this is the target date, and we have seen where other proposals have slipped, but that's the current standing of the rules.
So I certainly deem this as important because cybersecurity is always a difficult thing for the directors to get their arms around. And if you have some process in that, I think it's going to be helpful. But what were some of the proposed highlights in the disclosure that people should be thinking about at this point in time?
Yeah, TK, there's obviously a lot to the SEC's proposed rules on cybersecurity. And maybe I'll start with the fact that the SEC issued these rules to provide consistent, comparable, and decision-useful information for investors. As you just mentioned, cybersecurity risk is a significant risk for organizations. So the SEC wanted to give investors more information on how companies are managing this risk, how boards are overseeing it, et cetera. So the proposed rules really can be broken down into two main buckets. One bucket is on incident disclosure, and the second bucket is on disclosures around strategy, risk management, and governance. So if we take the first bucket, which is on incident disclosure, what the SEC's proposed rules would require is that companies would need to disclose material cybersecurity incidents within 4 days on Form 8K. So let me break that down a little bit. The trigger here would be materiality. So once companies deem a cyber incident to be material, it would need to be disclosed within 4 days. And I know there's always questions about materiality, but the materiality is the same as it was in the SEC's cyber guidance previous to the proposed rules, which is what would be important to a reasonable investor. So companies would need to disclose these material incidents if they're a single incident, and disclose even if there is immaterial incidents that in the aggregate become material. And they would need to do this within 4 days. So that timeline can be a real challenge for companies in meeting that 4-day disclosure. And then the last aspect of that part of the rules that I'll mention is the requirement to put it in a Form 8K. Right now, many companies, when they disclose cyber incidents, may do so in different formats. They might do it in 8K, they might do it in a press release, they might do it on their website. And I think there was a report issued earlier this year that looked at 2021 data, and only about 20% of companies actually disclose the cybersecurity incidents in a Form 8K. So that really drives towards the consistency and the comparability that the SEC was looking for. The second part of the rules relates to disclosure around cybersecurity regarding strategy, risk management, and governance. And in this part of the proposed rules, the SEC is looking for companies to provide a lot more disclosure than they do today around cyber-specific elements of their risk management program. And if you look at the disclosure rules, I think a lot of the rules relate to having a robust risk management program. And so the SEC is looking for disclosure around a description of the risk assessment processes, how the company manages these risks through protecting and detecting this information, how cyber risk is addressed in third-party programs, disclosure around business continuity and recovery plans. So there's a lot more here to these disclosures. And I think if I look across many companies' proxy statements today, many of them don't provide this level of disclosure. The other key part of the second bucket is this disclosure will now be part of a 10K. And I think many of us thought this would be in the proxy statement, but it actually will be in a 10K filing. And so I think that's a pretty significant change. And I think for boards, CEOs, CFOs, they'll want to be looking at these disclosures to make certain that they're accurate and that there's operating processes in place that are really effective around these risk management areas. And of course, I have to finish with one other key area that I know many boards are interested in is within the proposed rules, the SEC is asking for companies to disclose whether there is cyber expertise on their board. And if they do have cyber expertise on the board, to disclose the name or names of those individuals who meet that expertise. Now, the SEC didn't go as far as disclosing what cyber expertise means, but they've done it more in a principle-based format in terms of getting considerations that can be obviously considered to determine whether your board has cyber expertise. And I know this is an area we're getting a lot of questions from boards, in terms of, do they have a director who meets this expertise? Do they want to recruit a director? Is someone on the board or some individuals on the board getting additional cyber training? And what I'm hearing from a lot of these boards is that they're trying to get ahead of this disclosure and be comfortable with the approach that they provide on whether they have cyber expertise on the board or not. So those are just a few highlights. Of course, there's a lot more to the rules. And I certainly suggest for boards to be briefed in greater detail about what the boards mean to the board and their oversight role, as well as disclosures.
I'm a little, first of all, that was a great review of the highlights. I'm a little disappointed about the reporting who has the expertise for cyber. It puts it on the level of the financial expert. And there's just so many other facets of business that I think, are similar, human capital, M&A, all that stuff, where a board has to have the flexibility of, when they are a little shallow in an area, bringing in experts to update them or to be part of that process. But I guess the feeling is this is such an important risk, and it's can be so damaging to the company that they're going to treat it like a financial expert. And, obviously the SEC can do what they want relative to that. But I think you'll see a lot of this stuff end up in the proxy as well as all the filings. So let me ask you one other question, Barb. We have about 2 minutes left. What should boards be doing today? You mentioned one thing about, evaluating their expertise on the board, but what else should they be doing while they're waiting for the final guidelines?
When we're talking to boards or senior management, there's probably a few things we're telling them to do in addition to what I just mentioned about the board expertise. Is one, for boards, talking with management to make certain that there's clarity in terms of elevating cyber incidents that are happening at a company, to determine whether they're significant, to determine whether they're material, whether they require disclosure. And I think that's, focusing on whether those cyber reporting is also plugged into the disclosure controls and procedures processes at the company. From the board level, boards are also asking about, at what point are we being informed about cyber incidents at the company and those deemed to be significant or material to make certain that they are informed timely with regard to these incidents. The second thing that we're talking to management about and boards is boards asking management to do a gap assessment. Where do their current disclosures sit today against and aligned to the SEC's proposed disclosures, so that they can identify where gaps exist in their disclosure, and then also look to how to fill those gaps or whether they want to make any operational changes to address those gaps. I think for boards, it's also making certain that they are overseeing all of those various areas that will require disclosure. And the last point that I would make is regarding disclosures. As I said, there's going to be a lot of new disclosures for companies, and being able to put pen to paper and for management to do that and start thinking about what those disclosures will look like. Because as we all know, until we put pen to paper, we might see gaps. And doing that early and getting ahead of some of these disclosures will help make certain that there are effective risk management programs at the company. And the board management will want to do that, as these will now be in public filings.
Yeah. Well, Barbara, this is all great advice and guidance as far as the disclosures that are coming down the pike. And again, cybersecurity is a big deal. And so I understand that this is important information and that boards should be preparing so they aren't surprised. And I want to thank you for taking the time and joining us as usual and providing some great information that should be helpful to both companies and boards.
Thank you for having me, TK.
And that will conclude this session of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week and take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.